The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Wellington Barracks as Sergeant Major William Hayes adjusted his crimson tunic for the third time. His reflection in the polished brass buttons showed a man who had dedicated 25 years of his life to the British Army, but today felt different. Today marked his first day leading the Household Division's most prestigious musical ensemble during the world-famous changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. William's weathered hands trembled slightly as he picked up his conductor's baton, a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather who had served in the same capacity during World War II. The weight of tradition pressed heavily on his shoulders, knowing that millions of tourists and countless television viewers would witness every note, every step, every moment of precision that he and his 40-piece band would deliver. The rehearsal hall echoed with the sound of instruments being tuned and tested. Corporal James Mitchell, the youngest member of the band at just 19 years old, nervously polished his trumpet for the 5th time that morning. He had dreamed of this moment since childhood, watching the ceremony on television with his grandmother, who always said the music was what made the whole spectacle truly magical. Private Sarah Thompson adjusted her bearskin hat, one of only 3 female musicians in the traditional male-dominated ensemble. She had fought hard to earn her position as principal flautist, overcoming skepticism and prejudice with her exceptional musical talent and unwavering determination. Her journey from a small Welsh mining town to the steps of Buckingham Palace seemed almost impossible, yet here she stood, ready to make history. The band members represented a tapestry of backgrounds and stories. Lance Corporal David Park had immigrated from South Korea as a child and found solace in music during difficult times of adjustment. His mastery of the French horn had earned him respect among his peers and a coveted spot in the Royal Band. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez brought her Spanish heritage and passionate approach to percussion, adding a subtle flair that complemented the traditional British military march style. As the clock struck 7 in the morning, Sergeant Major Hayes called his musicians to attention. The rehearsal room fell silent except for the distant sounds of London awakening outside the barracks. Walls, double-decker buses rumbled past, their engines mixing with the chatter of early commuters heading to work, completely unaware of the meticulous preparations taking place just meters away. The band had spent months preparing for this particular ceremony, which would mark the opening of the summer tourist season and be broadcast live to over 50 countries worldwide. Every piece of music had been rehearsed countless times, every formation practiced until it became second nature, every uniform inspected to ensure it met the impossibly high standards expected of the Queen's Guard. William's mind wandered to his first experience witnessing the changing of the guard as a young boy visiting London with his parents. He remembered being mesmerized by the precision of the soldiers, the grandeur of their uniforms, and most importantly, the stirring music that seemed to bring the entire ceremony to life. That day had planted a seed that would grow into a lifelong passion for military music and service to the Crown. The rehearsal began with the traditional opening fanfare, a piece that had been played at Buckingham Palace for over 2 centuries. As the first notes filled the air, something magical happened. Individual musicians transformed into a cohesive unit, their personal stories and backgrounds melding together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The music seemed to carry the weight of history, tradition, and national pride. Corporal Mitchell's trumpet soared above the ensemble, clear and confident despite his nerves. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind about music being the soul of the ceremony, and he felt a deep connection to every musician who had stood in this position before him. Private Thompson's flute added delicate flourishes that complemented the brass section perfectly, her technical precision earning approving nods from the more senior musicians. The percussion section, led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, provided the rhythmic backbone that kept the entire ensemble moving in perfect synchronization. Her years of experience showed in every subtle gesture and perfectly timed beat, guiding younger musicians through complex transitions and tempo changes. As they worked through their repertoire, each piece told a story of British military history. The British Grenadiers echoed battles fought centuries ago, while men of Harlech honored the Welsh regiments that had served with distinction across the globe. Modern arrangements of traditional tunes bridged the gap between historical significance and contemporary appeal, ensuring the music remained relevant to diverse audiences. The acoustics of the rehearsal room presented unique challenges that would be magnified in the open courtyard of Buckingham Palace. William had spent hours studying weather reports and wind patterns, knowing that outdoor performances required different techniques and adjustments. The musicians had practiced compensating for various conditions, learning to project their sound effectively while maintaining the precise intonation that royal ceremonies demanded. During a brief break, the band members shared quiet conversations about their hopes and concerns for the upcoming performance. Some discussed technical passages that required extra attention, while others reflected on family members who would be watching from around the world. The mixture of excitement and nervous energy created a palpable atmosphere of anticipation. The morning rehearsal concluded with a complete run-through of the entire ceremony's musical program. From the initial assembly call to the final farewell, fanfare, every note had been carefully planned and executed. As the last chord faded away, William felt a surge of pride in his ensemble's preparation and dedication. Walking back to the barracks after rehearsal, the band members could see crowds already beginning to gather along the mall and around Buckingham Palace. Street vendors were setting up their stalls, selling miniature Union Jack flags and royal memorabilia to eager tourists. Police officers were positioning barriers and checking security protocols, while palace staff made final preparations for what would be one of the most watched ceremonies of the year. The stage was set, the players were ready, and history waited to unfold once again through the power of music and tradition. In just a few hours, Sergeant Major William Hayes would raise his baton and lead his musicians into a performance that would carry forward centuries of British military heritage while creating new memories for people around the world. The sun climbed higher over central London as tourists from every corner of the globe converged on Buckingham Palace. The familiar red double-decker buses discharged passengers carrying cameras, guidebooks, and expressions of wonder as they caught their first glimpse of the iconic palace gates. Street performers entertained the growing crowds with juggling acts and musical performances, adding to the festive atmosphere that always preceded the changing of the guard ceremony. Among the spectators was 8-year-old Emma Chen, visiting London for the first time with her parents from Vancouver, Canada. She clutched a small Canadian flag in one hand and a disposable camera in the other, her eyes wide with amazement at the grandeur surrounding her. Her father had explained the historical significance of the ceremony during their journey from the hotel, but Emma was most excited about seeing the famous red uniforms and hearing the music her grandfather had described in stories about his own visit to London 50 years earlier. Standing near the palace gates, elderly couple Margaret and Arthur Whitfield had traveled from their retirement home in Yorkshire, specifically to witness this ceremony. Margaret's late brother had served in the household division during the 1960s, and she carried a faded photograph of him in his dress uniform. The couple had made this pilgrimage annually for the past 15 years, finding comfort and connection to their family's military heritage through the timeless ritual about to unfold. Japanese businessman Hiroshi Tanaka adjusted his expensive camera equipment, preparing to document every moment of the ceremony for his photography blog that had thousands of followers back home. He had studied British military traditions extensively and could identify each regiment by their distinctive uniform details. His passion for military history had brought him to London multiple times, but this particular ceremony held special significance as it marked the opening of the tourist season, with enhanced pageantry and musical performances. The crowd included a surprising mix of ages and backgrounds. University students from across Europe had arrived early to secure prime viewing positions, some having camped overnight along the ceremonial route. Business executives on lunch breaks checked their watches, hoping to catch at least part of the spectacle before returning to their offices. Families with young children struggled to keep their excited offspring entertained while waiting for the ceremony to begin. Inside the palace grounds, final preparations were reaching fever pitch. Palace staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards expected for royal events. Head groundskeeper Thomas Bradley supervised his team as they made last-minute adjustments to the ceremonial area, checking that every blade of grass was perfectly trimmed and every pathway spotless. The kitchen staff had been working since dawn, preparing refreshments for the hundreds of officials, dignitaries, and staff members involved in the ceremony. Silver tea services gleamed under careful polishing, while traditional British biscuits and sandwiches were arranged with military precision on fine china plates. Even the catering reflected the attention to detail that characterized every aspect of royal protocol. Security personnel conducted their final briefings and equipment checks. Scotland Yard officers worked alongside palace security to ensure the safety of both participants and spectators. Plainclothes officers mingled with the crowds, their trained eyes scanning for anything unusual while maintaining the friendly, approachable demeanor that tourists expected from British police. Meanwhile, back at Wellington Barracks, the royal band members were undergoing final uniform inspections. Each button had to shine like a mirror, every piece of equipment positioned exactly according to regulations that had been refined over generations. Sergeant Major Hayes walked slowly down the ranks, his experienced eye catching the smallest imperfections that civilian observers would never notice. The bearskin hats, one of the most recognizable symbols of British pageantry, received special attention. These magnificent pieces of military headwear, standing 18 inches tall and made from the fur of Canadian black bears, were carefully brushed and positioned. Each hat was a work of art in itself, requiring skilled craftsmen months to create, and representing a tradition dating back to the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Private Thompson's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her uniform's ceremonial cords and braiding. The elaborate decorations served both aesthetic and practical purposes, with each element having specific historical significance. The red tunic, officially known as a frock coat, had been tailored to fit her perfectly, ensuring that she could perform her musical duties while maintaining the pristine appearance expected of the Queen's Guard. The weapons inspection followed the uniform check with equal rigor. Although the ceremonial rifles carried by the guards were not loaded with live ammunition, they were treated with the same respect and attention as combat weapons. Each rifle had to be spotless, properly maintained, and carried with the precise movements that had been drilled into every soldier until they became automatic responses. Corporal Mitchell practiced his breathing exercises, a technique his music instructor had taught him to manage performance anxiety. The weight of his ceremonial sword and the restriction of his tight-fitting uniform made playing his trumpet more challenging than normal rehearsal conditions. He had spent countless hours practicing in full-dress uniform to prepare for exactly these challenges. The band's instruments underwent their own final inspection. Each brass instrument gleamed like gold, polished to perfection and checked for proper tuning and mechanical function. The drums received special attention, with their traditional rope tensioning systems adjusted to produce the crisp, sharp sounds that would cut through the outdoor acoustics and reach every member of the assembled crowd. Weather conditions played a crucial role in outdoor musical performances, and meteorologists had been providing regular updates throughout the morning. A light breeze from the west would help carry the music to the crowds, but could also affect intonation and balance among the instruments. The musicians had trained for various weather scenarios, learning to adjust their playing techniques accordingly. As the appointed time approached, radio communications between various teams intensified. The ceremony's coordination required split-second timing between multiple groups spread across several locations. Military police units positioned along the ceremonial route reported that crowds were gathering as expected, with no unusual incidents or security concerns. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment hours earlier, testing camera angles and audio equipment to ensure perfect coverage of the historic event. The BBC's chief commentator reviewed his notes one final time, preparing to provide live narration that would help international audiences understand the ceremony's historical significance and intricate details. The excitement was building to a crescendo, as every element came together for what promised to be a memorable ceremony. From the youngest tourist to the most experienced palace official, everyone involved felt the anticipation that always preceded these grand displays of British tradition and military precision. The ancient clock tower of St. James's Palace chimed 11 times, its bronze bells carrying across the morning air to signal that the ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. The sound seemed to awaken something primal in the gathered crowds, as thousands of spectators pressed closer to the palace railings and adjusted their cameras for the spectacle about to unfold. Inside the guardroom at Wellington Barracks, Sergeant Major Hayes made his final address to the assembled musicians. His voice carried the weight of military authority combined with genuine paternal concern for his charges. Each man and woman under his command represented years of training, dedication, and personal sacrifice to reach this moment of supreme military pageantry. The band members stood at rigid attention, their instruments gleaming in the morning sunlight that streamed through the barracks windows. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the occasional bark of commands from other units preparing for the ceremony. This moment of calm before the storm had become sacred to military musicians, a chance to center themselves mentally and emotionally for the performance ahead. William's thoughts drifted momentarily to his wife Margaret, who would be watching the live television broadcast from their home in Hampshire. She had supported his military career through countless deployments and ceremonies. Understanding that his dedication to the Royal Band was more than just a job, it was a calling that connected him to centuries of British military tradition and national identity. The march from Wellington Barracks to Buckingham Palace would take exactly 11 minutes, timed to the second through decades of practice and refinement. Every step had been measured and rehearsed, every musical cue planned, to coincide with specific landmarks along the route. The precision required was extraordinary, demanding absolute concentration and flawless execution from every participant. Corporal Mitchell felt his heartbeat synchronize with the imagined rhythm of the upcoming march. His trumpet, a silver-plated instrument manufactured specifically for military bands, had been his constant companion for the past 3 years. The weight in his hands provided comfort and confidence, representing countless hours of practice and the gradual mastery of his craft. The uniform inspection concluded with the traditional ceremonial sword check. Each blade had to be perfectly clean and sharp enough to satisfy regulations, though they served purely ceremonial purposes in the modern era. The swords represented an unbroken link to the warrior traditions that had protected British monarchs for over 1,000 years. Private Thompson's flute case contained not just her instrument, but also a small photograph of her late music teacher, Mrs. Davies, who had encouraged her to pursue military music despite the challenges she would face as a woman in a traditionally male field. The photograph served as a reminder of the people who had believed in her potential when she struggled to believe in herself. The band's formation for the march had been planned with mathematical precision. Taller musicians stood in the back, rows to create visual symmetry, while the positioning of instruments followed acoustical principles designed to project sound effectively in outdoor environments. Even the spacing between individual musicians had been calculated to create optimal visual and auditory impact. Street cleaners had worked through the night to ensure that the ceremonial route was immaculate. Every piece of litter had been removed, every surface scrubbed clean, and every manhole cover aligned perfectly with the surrounding pavement. The attention to detail extended to aspects that most observers would never notice, but which contributed to the overall impression of military precision and royal grandeur. The horses of the household cavalry had been groomed to perfection, their coats brushed until they gleamed like silk in the morning sunlight. These magnificent animals represented another living link to Britain's military heritage, their bloodlines carefully maintained, and their training conducted to the highest standards. The relationship between rider and horse in the ceremonial context went beyond mere function, to become a partnership in preserving tradition. Traffic control officers had been repositioning barriers and redirecting pedestrians since early morning. The ceremony's impact on London's transportation network was enormous, requiring coordination between police, transport authorities, and emergency services. Tourists often underestimated the logistical complexity required to stage these seemingly effortless displays of pageantry. Amateur photographers jostled for position along the ceremonial route, many having arrived hours before the official start time. Professional news photographers, easily identified by their expensive telephoto lenses and press credentials, had secured prime positions through careful advance planning and industry connections. The ceremony would be documented from every conceivable angle, creating a visual record that would be preserved for future generations. The royal standard flying above Buckingham Palace indicated that the Queen was in residence, adding extra significance to the day's ceremony. Her presence, though rarely visible to the public during routine ceremonies, lent an air of authenticity and historical continuity that no amount of pageantry could replicate. The knowledge that the monarch herself might be watching from palace windows elevated every participant's sense of responsibility and pride. International dignitaries and embassy officials had been invited to observe the ceremony from special viewing areas within the palace grounds. These diplomatic guests represented dozens of countries, many of which had their own ceremonial traditions, but recognized the unique character and global appeal of British military pageantry. The ceremony served as both entertainment and subtle demonstration of British cultural influence. The BBC's production team made final adjustments to their broadcasting equipment, preparing to beam live coverage to an estimated global audience of 50 million viewers. Commentary scripts had been prepared in multiple languages, with particular attention paid to explaining historical references and military terminology that might be unfamiliar to international audiences. Local businesses along the ceremonial route had decorated their shop fronts with Union Jack bunting and royal memorabilia. Cafe owners expected their busiest day of the year, while souvenir vendors positioned themselves strategically to capitalize on tourist enthusiasm. The ceremony's economic impact extended far beyond the palace gates, benefiting countless small businesses throughout central London. Weather forecasters confirmed that conditions remained ideal for the outdoor ceremony. Clear skies and gentle breezes would ensure that the music carried clearly to spectators, while allowing the colorful uniforms and ceremonial details to be seen at their best. Military planners always prepared contingency plans for adverse weather, but perfect conditions like these were considered a good omen for the ceremony's success. The final moments before departure created an atmosphere of focused tension throughout the barracks. Every participant understood that they were about to become part of a living piece of history, their individual performances combining to create something greater than any single contribution. The weight of tradition and expectation was enormous, but so too was the pride and sense of purpose that came with serving the crown in such a visible and meaningful way. At precisely 11:30, the great brass gates of Wellington Barracks swung open with ceremonial grandeur. The sound of creaking hinges, polished and maintained by generations of military personnel, seemed to whisper promises of the spectacle about to unfold. Sergeant Major Hayes raised his silver-tipped conductor's baton, and 41 musicians drew breath in perfect unison, their instruments poised for the opening fanfare that would announce their departure to the waiting world. The first notes of the British Grenadiers rang out across Birdcage Walk, like a call to arms from centuries past. The melody, composed in the 17th century and refined through countless performances, carried with it the spirits of every soldier who had ever marched to its stirring rhythm. Corporal Mitchell's trumpet soared above the ensemble, clear and confident, his weeks of nervous preparation crystallizing into this moment of pure musical expression. The crowd that had gathered along the ceremonial route erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers. Children waved miniature Union Jack flags while their parents fumbled with cameras, trying to capture the magnificent sight of the royal band in full ceremonial dress. The crimson tunics blazed like flames in the morning sunlight, while the towering bearskin hats added an element of ancient majesty to the precisely choreographed formation. Emma Chen jumped up and down with excitement, her small hands clapping, in time with the music. Her mother lifted her onto her father's shoulders for a better view, and the little girl's delighted laughter mixed with the martial strains of the military march. This moment would become one of her most treasured childhood memories, inspiring a lifelong love of music and British culture that would eventually lead her to study at the Royal College of Music 20 years later. The formation moved with clockwork precision down Birdcage Walk, each musician maintaining perfect alignment with their neighbors while navigating the subtle curves and inclines of the historic street. The years of drill and practice had transformed individual performers into a single organism, breathing and moving, as one entity devoted to the dual purposes of musical excellence and military ceremony. Private Thompson felt the power of the moment surge through her as her flute added delicate counter-melodies to the martial brass. The discrimination and doubt she had faced during her early military career seemed insignificant now. Overwhelmed by the profound sense of belonging and purpose, that came with being part of this ancient tradition. Her grandmother in Wales would be watching on television, tears of pride streaming down her weathered cheeks. The percussion section, led by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, provided the rhythmic heartbeat that kept the entire procession moving in perfect synchronization. The bass drum's deep tones seemed to emerge from the very stones of London itself, while the snare drums created intricate patterns that had been passed down through generations of military musicians. Each beat was precisely calculated to match the cadence of marching feet on ancient cobblestones. Tourists pressed against the barriers that lined the route, their faces illuminated with wonder and excitement. Many had traveled thousands of miles specifically to witness this ceremony, drawn by the unique combination of pageantry, history, and musical excellence that no other nation could quite replicate. Street vendors moved through the crowd selling programs, postcards, and commemorative items, their cheerful calls adding to the carnival atmosphere. The band's repertoire for the march included carefully selected pieces that told the story of British military heritage. Men of Harlech honored the Welsh regiments, while Scotland the Brave acknowledged the Scottish unit's contributions to the household division. Each piece had been arranged specifically for outdoor performance, with particular attention paid to acoustics and the need to project sound across large open spaces. Television cameras tracked the procession from multiple angles, their operators working to capture both the grand spectacle and intimate human moments that made the ceremony compelling to viewers worldwide. The BBC's senior commentator provided context and historical background, his cultured voice helping international audiences understand the deeper significance of what they were witnessing. Margaret and Arthur Whitfield stood near the palace gates, Margaret clutching the faded photograph of her brother in his dress uniform. As the band approached, she could almost see his face among the musicians, young and proud in his scarlet tunic and bearskin hat. Arthur squeezed her hand gently, understanding the mixture of pride and sorrow that these ceremonies always evoked in families with military connections. The Japanese photographer Hiroshi Tanaka worked quickly with his expensive equipment, capturing not just the obvious spectacle but also the smaller details that revealed the ceremony's true character. The concentration on a young drummer's face, the precise positioning of sword hilts, the way morning light caught the brass instruments. These elements combined to create a visual story that would resonate with his blog's readers back home. Police officers maintained order with good humor and patience, their own pride in the ceremony evident in their careful attention to crowd safety and comfort. Many were veterans themselves, understanding from personal experience the dedication and skill required to perform at this level of precision. Their presence provided security, while allowing the celebration to maintain its joyful, festive character. The music echoed off the buildings lining the route, creating a natural amplification that carried the melodies far beyond the immediate vicinity. Office workers pressed against windows in the government buildings along Whitehall, taking brief breaks from their daily routines to witness this display of national heritage. The contrast between modern London's bustling commercial life and this timeless ceremony highlighted Britain's unique ability to preserve tradition within a rapidly changing world. Street musicians who regularly performed in the area had ceased their own activities out of respect for the passing band, many of them professional musicians who understood and appreciated the extraordinary skill on display. Some stood with their instrument cases at their feet, listening with the trained ears of fellow performers to the technical excellence and artistic interpretation being demonstrated. The ceremonial swords worn by the musicians caught the sunlight and threw brief flashes of silver across the crowd. These weapons, while purely decorative in the modern context, represented centuries of military service and sacrifice. Each sword was a work of art in itself, crafted by skilled artisans and maintained to standards that honored both their practical heritage and ceremonial significance. As the procession approached the final turn toward Buckingham Palace, the anticipation among both participants and spectators reached fever pitch. The grand finale of the march was just moments away, when the band would take their position in the palace forecourt and begin the formal ceremony that millions had gathered to witness. Every note had been perfect, every step precisely executed, building toward the climactic moment when tradition and excellence would combine in one of the world's most magnificent displays of military pageantry. The magnificent iron gates of Buckingham Palace came into view as the royal band rounded the final corner of their ceremonial march. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. Thousands of spectators packed the forecourt and lined the mall, their faces turned expectantly toward the approaching musicians. The Victoria Memorial stood majestically in the center of the scene, its white marble gleaming in the midday sun like a beacon of imperial grandeur. Sergeant Major Hayes felt his chest swell with pride as he led his musicians through the palace gates and into the sacred space where monarchs had been honored for over 3 centuries. The transition from the bustling streets of London to the formal confines of the royal residence was marked by an almost tangible change in atmosphere. Here, every stone had witnessed history. Every ceremony had added another layer to the rich tapestry of British royal tradition. The band took their predetermined positions in the forecourt with military precision, forming a perfect rectangle that had been measured and marked days in advance. Each musician knew exactly where to stand, their positions calculated to provide optimal acoustics while creating the visual symmetry that royal ceremonies demanded. The crimson tunics formed a blazing field of color against the gray stones of the palace courtyard. Television cameras positioned around the forecourt captured every detail of the formation, beaming live images to an estimated global audience of 60 million viewers across 57 countries. The ceremony's international appeal lay not just in its spectacle, but in its representation of unchanging values in an increasingly chaotic world. For many viewers, watching the changing of the guard provided a sense of stability and continuity that their own rapidly changing societies seemed to lack. The incoming guard, having marched from Chelsea Barracks, approached from the opposite direction with equally impressive precision. Their scarlet uniforms and bearskin hats created a mirror image of ceremonial splendor, while their regimental band added another layer of musical complexity to the unfolding drama. The 2 military units would soon participate in the ancient ritual of guard duty transfer, but first came the musical prelude that would set the tone for everything that followed. Private Thompson positioned her flute with practiced ease, feeling the familiar weight of the instrument in her hands. The acoustics of the palace forecourt were unique, with the surrounding buildings creating natural reverberation that could either enhance or complicate outdoor musical performance. She had studied these acoustic properties during training, learning to adjust her embouchure and breath control to compensate for the courtyard's particular sonic characteristics. The crowd pressed against the palace railings with barely contained excitement. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for better views, while elderly visitors recalled similar ceremonies they had witnessed decades earlier. Among the spectators were veterans of various conflicts, their faces showing recognition and respect for the military traditions being displayed before them. The ceremony served as a bridge between past and present, honoring those who had served while inspiring future generations. Corporal Mitchell's trumpet gleamed in the sunlight as he prepared for the opening fanfare that would formally begin the ceremony. The weight of his instrument felt reassuring in his hands, representing thousands of hours of practice and the gradual mastery of both technical skill and military bearing. His grandmother's words about music being the soul of the ceremony echoed in his mind as he drew breath for the first note. The palace staff watched from windows and doorways, many of them having witnessed hundreds of these ceremonies throughout their careers in royal service. Their presence added an element of continuity that connected this modern performance to all the ceremonies that had come before. Some were third-generation palace employees, their families having served the royal household for decades through changing monarchs and evolving traditions. Security personnel maintained discreet but vigilant watch over the proceedings, their training allowing them to appreciate the ceremony while remaining alert to potential threats. The protection of both participants and spectators required constant vigilance, but the officers took pride in ensuring that security measures never detracted from the ceremony's grandeur or accessibility to the public. The moment arrived for the ceremonial inspection of the guard. Officers moved through the ranks with practiced eyes, examining every detail of uniform, equipment, and deportment. This ritual served both practical and symbolic purposes, demonstrating military discipline while reinforcing the standards of excellence expected from those who guarded the sovereign. Each soldier stood at rigid attention, knowing that millions of eyes were upon them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded major performances. Her percussion section would provide the rhythmic foundation for the entire ceremony, their precise timing essential for coordinating the complex choreography of the guard change. The bass drum alone weighed 30 pounds, but she had trained until carrying it seemed effortless, allowing her to focus entirely on the musical and ceremonial aspects of her role. The ceremony's historical significance extended far beyond mere pageantry. These rituals had evolved over centuries, adapting to changing times while preserving essential elements that connected modern Britain to its royal heritage. Foreign diplomats in the crowd understood that they were witnessing something uniquely British, a perfect fusion of military efficiency, artistic excellence, and respect for tradition that few other nations could replicate. Amateur musicians in the audience listened with trained ears, appreciating technical aspects that casual observers might miss. The intonation maintained despite outdoor conditions, the precise ensemble playing despite the challenges of performing. In formation, the way individual musicians subordinated their personalities to serve the greater artistic and ceremonial purpose. These elements combined to create something approaching perfection in collective musical performance. The changing of the guard itself represented one of the world's oldest continuously performed military ceremonies. The ritual had been refined and polished through centuries of repetition, each generation of guardsmen adding their own contributions, while preserving the essential elements that gave the ceremony its power and meaning. Today's participants were keepers of a flame that had burned continuously for over 400 years. British expatriates living around the world gathered in pubs, clubs, and private homes to watch the live television coverage, finding in the ceremony a connection to their homeland that transcended geographic distance. For many, the sight of the guards in their traditional uniforms and the sound of the military bands playing familiar tunes evoked powerful emotions of national identity and cultural belonging. The precision timing required for the ceremony demanded split-second coordination between multiple groups spread across the palace grounds. Radio communications crackled with updates and confirmations as various elements moved into position. Every participant had studied the ceremony's choreography until their movements became automatic, allowing them to focus on the perfection of execution that distinguished this ceremony from mere military drill. As the formal guard change approached its climax, the tension and anticipation among both participants and spectators reached its peak. This was the moment when months of preparation would culminate in a display of British military tradition that would be remembered by everyone present and broadcast to millions around the world. The royal band stood ready to provide the musical accompaniment for what many considered the finest example of ceremonial pageantry in the modern world. The clock above the palace entrance showed exactly 12 noon as Sergeant Major Hayes raised his baton for the final musical sequence of the ceremony. The moment had arrived for the grand finale that would conclude one of the most watched military ceremonies in the world. 41 musicians drew breath simultaneously, their instruments catching the midday sun like beacons of polished brass and silver. The opening notes of God Save the Queen rang out across the forecourt with such clarity and power that even the most distant spectators felt the music reach their hearts. This was more than mere performance. It was a musical prayer, a declaration of loyalty, and a celebration of continuity that connected every person present to centuries of British history. The national anthem had been played at this very spot for generations, but each performance carried its own unique significance and emotional resonance. Corporal Mitchell's trumpet soared above the ensemble in the anthem's triumphant melody, his tone pure and confident after the morning's flawless execution. The nervous young man who had polished his instrument so anxiously just hours before had been transformed by the ceremony into a confident performer worthy of his position in the royal band. His grandmother's words about music being the soul of the ceremony had proven prophetic. The music had indeed elevated the entire spectacle beyond mere military drill into something approaching art. The crowd joined in singing the familiar words, their voices creating a chorus of thousands that seemed to unite every nationality and background represented in the forecourt. Emma Chen sang along in her sweet child's voice, not understanding all the words but feeling the power of the moment wash over her. Her parents exchanged meaningful glances, knowing they were witnessing something their daughter would remember for the rest of her life. Private Thompson felt tears of pride threatening to spill from her eyes as she played the delicate flute accompaniment to the anthem. The journey from her small Welsh mining town to this moment at Buckingham Palace seemed impossible. Yet here she stood as living proof that determination and talent could overcome any obstacle. The photograph of her late music teacher seemed to smile from inside her instrument case, a silent witness to dreams fulfilled against all odds. The ceremony's climax arrived with the formal presentation of the new guard to the officer commanding. Ancient words were spoken with precision and gravity, their meaning enhanced by the musical accompaniment that had preceded them. The transfer of responsibility for guarding the sovereign was complete, executed with a perfection that honored both military tradition and the institution of monarchy itself. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez felt the deep satisfaction that came with flawless execution as her percussion section provided the rhythmic foundation for the ceremony's conclusion. The months of preparation, the early morning rehearsals, the attention to countless details had all led to this moment of triumph. Her Spanish heritage had found perfect expression through her service to British military tradition, proving that excellence transcended national boundaries. The guards who had completed their duty began their march back to barracks, their place taken by fresh sentries who would maintain their vigil throughout the coming hours. The changing of the guard was complete, but the ceremony's impact would resonate far beyond the palace gates. Television coverage would carry images and sounds of British pageantry to every corner of the globe, inspiring future visitors and reinforcing Britain's reputation for ceremonial excellence. Margaret and Arthur Whitfield stood quietly as the crowds began to disperse, the faded photograph of Margaret's brother still clutched in her weathered hands. The ceremony had provided a powerful connection to family memories and national heritage, reminding them that some things remained constant in an ever-changing world. They would return to Yorkshire with renewed pride in their country's traditions and their own family's contribution to military service. Japanese photographer Hiroshi Tanaka reviewed the hundreds of images he had captured throughout the ceremony, each frame telling part of the larger story of British military pageantry. His blog's readers would experience the ceremony through his expert eye, gaining appreciation for details and nuances that casual observers might miss. The photography would serve as a bridge between cultures, sharing British traditions with audiences around the world. The band began their return march to Wellington Barracks, their music now carrying a different quality, the satisfaction of duty accomplished and excellence achieved. The crowds that lined their route applauded with genuine enthusiasm, recognizing that they had witnessed something special. Street vendors continued their cheerful trade in royal memorabilia, knowing that this ceremony would create memories lasting a lifetime. Sergeant Major Hayes felt profound satisfaction as he led his musicians through the palace gates and back onto the London streets. His first ceremony as bandmaster had exceeded every expectation, demonstrating that the traditions he had inherited would continue to flourish under his leadership. The silver-tipped baton in his hand seemed lighter now, no longer a burden of responsibility, but a symbol of achievement and continuity. The economic impact of the ceremony extended throughout central London as thousands of visitors moved on to explore other attractions, dine in local restaurants, and shop for souvenirs. Hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, and tourist attractions all benefited from the ceremony's drawing power, demonstrating that tradition and heritage could drive modern economic activity while preserving historical values. Television audiences around the world had witnessed something uniquely British, a perfect fusion of military precision, musical excellence, and respect for tradition that few other nations could replicate. The ceremony served as cultural diplomacy of the highest order, showcasing British values and capabilities without fanfare or self-promotion, simply through the quiet excellence of its execution. Back at Wellington Barracks, the band members began the process of cleaning and storing their instruments and uniforms. Each piece of equipment would be maintained to the same exacting standards that had characterized the ceremony itself, ready for the next performance in an endless cycle. of preparation and execution that had continued for centuries. The ceremony's participants would return to their normal duties, but they carried with them the knowledge that they had been part of something larger than themselves. They had served as guardians of tradition, ambassadors of excellence, and representatives of values that transcended individual achievement. The royal band had once again proven that music could elevate military ceremony into art, creating moments of beauty and meaning that would be remembered long after the last note had faded into the London air. Young musicians watching on television around the world had seen examples of what dedication and skill could achieve. Some would be inspired to pursue military music careers, others to improve their own playing standards, and still others to appreciate the power of tradition in preserving cultural heritage. The ceremony's influence would ripple outward through generations, inspiring future performers to maintain the standards of excellence that made British military pageantry the envy of the world. As the afternoon sun climbed higher over London, normal life resumed in the streets around Buckingham Palace. Traffic flowed freely again, tourists dispersed to other attractions, and the ancient stones of the palace forecourt settled back into their timeless silence. But for the thousands who had witnessed the ceremony and the millions who had watched on television, the memory of perfect music, flawless precision, and magnificent pageantry would endure as a reminder that some things in this world remained beautiful, meaningful, and worthy of preservation. The changing of the guard ceremony was complete, but its legacy would continue through every person who had been touched by its magic, every musician inspired by its excellence, and every tradition upheld through its perfect execution. The royal band had led the opening of another season of ceremonial pageantry, ensuring that Britain's military heritage would continue to inspire and unite people from every corner of the globe.